theory, marketing your gym isn't all that complicated. After all, there are really so many things you can do to get the word out about a brick and mortar gym. However, context matters. Today, we're going to discuss an often overlooked element of deciding how best to market your gym. And it's super important because if you get this wrong, you're going to spend a lot of time spinning your wheels. My name is Mark Fisher from businessforunicorns.com, and if you like these YouTube videos, well, you might like some fitness knowledge coming at you right inside your ear hole. Click the link below and go to beforyoupodcast.com to subscribe to our Business for Unicorns podcast on your preferred podcast app. So here is the thing that I think often gets missed in discussions about marketing. Ultimately, part of what should determine the channels that you use to get the word out is your geographic market. Now, your demographic market, right, or your customer avatar, that matters too, right? The demographic and psychographic qualities of who it is you're looking to serve, right? So as you're considering things like brand and even where you're marketing, that matters, right? Because obviously if your target demographic is, let's say young moms versus busy business executive men in their late 50s, you're going to be marketing in different places. And I think that's important too. But I want to highlight something I don't hear discussed as often, which I think is a big piece of this, is actually not just the demographic and psychographic of your prospects, but also the geographic area where your gym is located. Now, I like to think of this in four big categories. You have tier 1 urban markets, like Mark Fisher Fitness, right? Downtown, Midtown Manhattan, Hell's Kitchen. There's a lot of stuff going on there. Then you have tier 2 urban markets. And I would define these as, maybe like a Louisville, Kentucky, where it's an urban market, it's a city, but it is not as overwhelming as maybe a place like New York City. And third, you have suburban markets. So these types of areas are going to be obviously even more of a car culture. They are going to be more tightly populated, but they're not cities. There's a very different way of life in these areas. And because of that, I think different channels of marketing are more or less effective. The fourth market that I think I'd like to cut things into are rural markets, right? Rural markets are defined by not having as dense of a population, right? And that can mean a number of things, not the least of which oftentimes in rural markets, people might be willing to drive a little bit longer just because there's gonna be less options. Now, before we dig in, let's say, but of course there are obvious exceptions, right? So this is a model that is not completely perfect. You have to figure out how this is gonna work for you. Now, I will say this is gonna be less of the case if we're talking about digital marketing. So everything from no strategies like doing paid Facebook and paid Google ads. But overall, the approximate strategy is not gonna be all that different. Furthermore, if you're talking about things like regular email marketing, organic social media marketing, it's really the offline strategies that are gonna really have a lot of variance depending on where your gym is located. So as an example, if you are in a densely populated tier 1 city, I think it's possible to have more profitable guerrilla marketing strategies. So what might that be? Well, one of the most famous ones was when Orange Theory, and admittedly Orange Theory did this in not all tier 1 cities, but would go into a market and would spray paint bikes orange and leave them around with a QR code, right? So that type of thing where you're relying on walking passerby traffic to discover things and a lot of pedestrian foot traffic, that's gonna be a little bit different. And I think in tightly populated markets, guerrilla stuff is not only gonna play better, but it's gonna be more important because ultimately you're trying to create a ruckus. A lot of the game in those markets are just having people know you exist. Because if they don't know you exist, it's really hard for them to like you and trust you and hire you. However, if you are in one of these markets, well, then you're probably not gonna have as easy of time of getting into, say, a local newspaper. Now, again, what's interesting is if you're in a true tier 1 urban market, you might have a hyper local neighborhood newspaper. And we actually have one of those in Hell's Kitchen, which we market in. However, I am not likely to have a lot of success getting a column opportunity in the New York Times, whereas in smaller markets, certainly suburban markets, rural markets, if you have the go-to local paper, it's probably gonna be cheaper to advertise in. If your people are reading that, it might make sense to pay money to even advertise. What I like even better is if you have the bandwidth is for you to write some column as a local fitness expert. An example of another consideration, right? Foot traffic in tier 1 urban markets are going to be dirtied by tourists, which we love. They're very important for the economy. But let's say hypothetically for Mark Fisher Fitness, it's not a bad idea probably to go out maybe with postcards in the corner of where we are, but a high percentage of the people walking don't live in the neighborhood, and a lot of situations don't live in the city. So they're not a really good place for us to market to. Whereas if you're in, let's say, a suburban market, which is not a place necessarily that is a tourist hub, you might do great posting up in front of Target or Whole Foods until they throw you out and running around with flyers with some free class offer to drive leads that way. Here's another example. If you're in a suburban market, something like a car wrap might work really, really well, right? I think this could still work in a rural market, but you might just have less eyes on it. And if you're in a tier 1 urban city, no one's even driving anyway. It's likely you might not even have a car. And if you do, again, you have the same issue where how much that pedestrian foot traffic is going to actually be local. Now, again, none of this is to be nihilistic or to say that all of these things can't work. Now, in closing, I will say that each of these markets probably have some pros and cons, right? It's widely considered that on the one hand, if you're in cities, you're gonna have a lot more competition. You'll have it from more sophisticated players like franchises and chains. And that's true, but it's also true you tend to have a lot more people that could conceivably actually go to your facility, and depending on the neighborhood, might have a lot more discretionary income, right? If you are in a more affluent suburb, sometimes I think that's actually the hardest market because you'll get the competition and you have people with income, but you don't have quite the population density, and convenience is still gonna be a factor when people are deciding where to train. In a rural market, they're gonna tend to have less options, to say nothing of the fact that even from a staffing perspective, you have people that are more likely to stick around for the longer haul. Your takeaway is you can win and thrive in all of these markets. And it's just like anything in life. You want to leverage the unique opportunities that you have in your market, and you want to mitigate and work around whatever the downsides are, right? Because no matter where you are, there's going to be some things that are helpful to you in your business goals. There are going to be some things that are more challenging. And ultimately, the principles are going to stay the same, right? People have to know you exist. Then you need some sort of systems to build the relationship over time so they like you, and they trust you, and then you need to make offers so they hire you. To that last point, I'll just say briefly, before you hit the subscribe button, check out my video, How to Create Fitness Marketing Content that Grows Your Gym. As always, if you're interested in learning more about how we help gym owners just like you create more income, more impact, and more freedom, head over to businessforunicorns.com. And I'll see you soon for our next video where I'll share with you more actionable tips, psychological frameworks, and philosophy.